We're going to talk to a man whose career I've followed and someone who I've been so impressed with the way he has dealt with all of the things that life has thrown to him. And this is Commander KirkLippold, who was the captain of the USS Cole when it was struck before September 11th. One of the things, and you've got a new book out, which I think is just fantastic. It's called Front Burner. When you were the commander of the USS Cole, you saw what the intelligence communities missed. You flagged this as something. Al-Qaeda wasn't just a lone, one-off, gee, what a terrible thing, it's never going to happen again. But you were the guy who said, this is the beginning of something. What did you see that nobody else saw?
Well, I think, KT, I just took a look at it and realized that Al-Qaeda had made a fundamental leap when they attacked USS Cole. We had had the attacks on World Trade Center 1, on Khobar Towers, the embassies. Those are buildings that house and represent U.S. interests. But when you attack a warship, that's something that defends U.S. interests and citizens around the globe. And when you attack something that defends and protects those interests, it's an act of war. And we fundamentally missed that opportunity to really look at it in the larger context of the threat that Al-Qaeda was to our nation. And unfortunately, we had one administration, the Clinton administration, that had had plenty of warning, did nothing to it for essentially 8 years throughout their administration, that when the attack on USS Cole occurred, all they really wanted to do between October and January 20th was wrap up the investigation and get out of office so they didn't leave anything on the table, as compared to the Bush administration that came in that kind of had this, we're forward-looking, not backward-acting, and you had a disconnected national security policy that clearly the nation paid a tragic price for on September 11th, and we're still paying for today.
One of the things I was struck with, and I went back and looked at the 2000 debates between then Governor Bush and Vice President Al Gore. And in the debates, they were asked all sorts of questions, but nobody brought up the question of the USS Cole bombing. And yet, it was something that, as you point out, it was a clear and present danger. This is somebody who declared war on us. Is this because we never understood the notion of a sub-national group? In other words, we were looking for enemies that were countries. We weren't looking for enemies that were a bunch of guys in a cave in Afghanistan.
I think what you really saw was an attitude that had been building literally for decades, where the U.S. government was somewhat willing to live with the loss of American life due to terrorists around the world as somewhat of a price that we would pay for being on the international stage. And it truly wasn't until we became attacked right here at home, on our homeland, that we realized we have let this go for too far, too long, and now these transnational, really in some ways, while they say it's not a state-sponsored terrorism, they clearly get their money from somewhere, especially to the degree that Al-Qaeda did, where they came and attacked us right here on our homeland, and that was where we were unwilling to wait any longer. And then we had to make the decision that we were no longer going to be reactive when it came to terrorist attacks, that we needed to be preemptive, we need to invest in the intelligence community and in the people that go out there into harm's way to learn about these organizations and then go hunt them down and kill them.
Well, we did. Is Al-Qaeda now finished? Bin Laden's gone. Al-Qaeda Prime doesn't seem to be active anymore. Is Al-Qaeda over? Can we pack our bags and say, great, victory, mission accomplished?
Absolutely not. If you think for 1 minute it may not be Al-Qaeda the next time, but trust me, these people who wish to do our nation harm, they're just going to come up under another banner. They are still bent on taking out the United States and everything that we apparently stand for throughout the world for freedom and democracy, because they're doing it under a very hateful and twisted religious ideology that we cannot allow to happen. And we need to continue to fight it on every front that we can, not just militarily, but especially in information and getting people out and letting them learn about what our country represents and what benefit it has in having an open and free society where free speech or freedom of speech is protected and encouraged.
Okay, so what you're really talking about then is soft power. It's American diplomacy, the stuff we used during the Cold War, where we tried to let the world know that we, you know, all the things that you've just said that we stand for. But what other military threats should we be looking for? You know, you're a guy who always has seen what's coming. What do you see coming down the road in the next 5 or 10 years as a military threat to the United States?
I think the biggest threat that we're facing right now, and that is the economic threat. Because if it's nice to have all those soft power things, but you also have to have a military with not only the capability, but the willingness to use it. And my concern right now is that we seem to be having an administration that is very uncomfortable with the military instrument of power, and they only want to use it when it is more in pursuit of a political agenda than in real national security objectives. I don't feel any safer today than I did on October 11, 2000, because I think we are compromising a number of areas. I look at, in fact, one of them, the clearest one to me comes from Guantanamo Bay. Following USS Cole, I went to work on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I was instrumental, along with a number of my friends, to put together what became detainee policy. Guantanamo Bay was stood up, and when people ask why Guantanamo, I looked at it as it should be the intelligence center for excellence in the war on terror for the United States government. It should be the place where we bring those terrorists, where we can interrogate them, interview them, whatever term you want to use. But that's where you learn to find out how these terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda or otherwise, recruit, train, equip, finance, and conduct terrorist operations. Because only when you truly understand how these groups operate can you target them for defeat. And I think that we need to make Guantanamo not the detention facility that it is unfortunately morphed into, but we in fact should make it that intelligence jewel, the crown jewel in our intelligence efforts to keep our nation safe.